the experiences and articulations of two very distinguished and powerful academics, critics, and poets, Professor Sukrita Paul Kumar and Professor Savita Singh, who I shall be referring to with their permission as Sukrita and Savita. And Viraam is a collective, essentially, committed to the cause of gendered nonviolence. So its intent is to shift gaze to subliminal forms of gender-based violence. And although pain and suffering we recognize are very personal, deeply personal and individual experiences, they are often structurally embedded and gendered. Such experiences of pain, we feel, solicit empathic and interactive outlets. Viraam as a forum proactively facilitates in the exercise of articulating and acknowledging the oft hidden, structural, embodied, and gendered experiences of subliminal violence, while, of course, exploring the possible way out. So, as a collective, we have been engaging with richly textured local narratives and counter stories whose details are often dismissed or disqualified by the dominant discourses. So, in Viraam, what we are attempting to do is we aspire rather to build a community where experiences of such violence, such pain can be articulated, shared, and understood while exploring the possible way out. In Suno, the segment that we are holding for this fortnight, we focus our gaze to the innumerable and subtle strategies in which words and even non-verbal subliminal cues can be used in our everyday as instruments of coercion and constraint, tools of intimidation, condescension, and contempt. So, Suno literally means to listen to the muffled and inarticulate expressions of our experiencers. I have the pleasure of introducing Sukrita Paul Kumar. Sukrita is an established poet, critic, and academic. Formerly a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, she's an invited poet at the International Writing Program at Iowa, USA. Speaking for myself is amongst her many important publications. Fellow of Cambridge Seminars and Hong Kong Baptist University, Center for Developing Countries, Delhi University, as well as Faculty Durrell Center at Corfu, Greece. She has published a number of collections of poems and books. Her poems have been published in their own voice, the Penguin Collection of Indian Women Poets, in many journals in India and abroad. The wealth of work which Sukrita has basically engaged in is very difficult to cover, within an introduction. But nevertheless, welcome, Sukrita. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you.
We also have Professor Savita Singh. Savita is professor in the School of Gender and Development Studies, IGNOU. She joined the school in 2009 as its first director, and currently she coordinates the PhD program in Gender and Development Studies and Masters in Gender and Development Studies in the school. Professor Singh has 4 collections of poems in Hindi, 2 in French, and her poems are a part of the syllabus of many universities. So Rowing Together is a bilingual collection of poems, Saath Chalte Hue. It's a bilingual presentation of poetry, and I'm just alluding to it because both of them basically came together and sort of attempted to, melt away the linguistic boundaries. So the courage with which they brought in to this entire endeavor to dilute, the authority of language and break into the silences expressed between these lines is something that all of us are very eager to know. So saying the unsaid essentially is considered to be the biggest challenge for any poet, or for that matter, any person who's expressing a narrative. Because these emotive experiences have to be dealt with a lot of finesse. And that, ma'am, has been reflected in your works. So we welcome you to Viraam. And in fact, you are our Renaissance ladies who don many hats. So welcome. Katyayani?
Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am. And as I and Priya were actually talking about it today evening,
that breaking the boundaries of language and actually going into a space where we use two languages to actually depict something so profound is something we would like to talk about, because in our current segment, Suno, we are actually exploring language and how actually language can either be an enabler or can be a perpetrator of symbolic violence. And to look at language in a form where we bring in two different languages and weave it into a poetry is something we would really love to talk about. But I think, with the permission of both of you, can we just start with talking about your journeys, your professional journey as well, and of course, your thoughts on gender, and then we'll throw the floor open to questions.
Sure.
Sukrita, why don't you start?
Okay. Starting is always. In the
meantime, I'll just pick up the book "Growing Together," which we did together, myself and Sukrita. I'll just
yes, ma'am.
Sure. So it's a kind of a, I don't know, it's not a start, because I think I've always felt that there is, in particularly a woman's life, there is a continuum. There is no beginning as such. It's you just come in the middle of it all suddenly, right? By that I mean that already in this society there are all kinds of orientations vis-a-vis gender. We all agree on this, that gender is a social construct. So if one talks about it as, okay, my journey, I think is very presumptive. I don't think it's my journey as such. I think it's the journey of women as a collective. So that's how you start, because you're born as a girl, and then you grow up, and within a certain kind of an orientation, and then either if people are supportive in your family, then you hear words like, oh, you are like our son, and which obviously you wonder, you want to be yourself as a woman and yet have equality and yet have some dignity of being, right, whatever you are. But those are the normative structures that we are living in anyway, right? So in the context of gender, the inequality speaks for itself when somebody tells you, when you're a girl, that we want to bring you up like our son, So obviously it means that on the part of the parent, it's very clear that they want to treat you as somebody better than what you are, better. Now, why am I not considered to be good enough as a girl, right? So, these are the questions that were raised in my mind long ago as a girl, when my father used to say this to me. And of course, he used to say that because he said, oh, you should. And he was a very liberated person. But he didn't realize, because it's so deeply, patriarchy is so deeply inscribed in you, right? So as a girl, I would not want to reject my girlhood to be a boy or to be a son, to be a son basically, because these roles are defined for you. So I think somewhere right from the beginning, there was this thrust to basically throw the binaries off somewhere, male, female. And then immediately, when I think of this, I think of Elaine Showalter, who describes the journey of a woman as, she says, okay, if you are alert, you might start as a feminine, person, feminine, who has imbibed all the patriarchal notions to be a feminine person in one sense, to play some roles. And then you become conscious of yourself as a woman, and somewhere the anger begins to creep up. Anger comes up because you're getting denied of certain things. There's a normative structure within which you begin to sort of find yourself reacting to a lot of things, So where is the scope for action then? Because it's always reaction that you are doing many a time, right? So that is the period when you evolve as a kind of a feminist out of anger, right? And this feminism then, if it matures, and I hope it has matured in me by now, and if it doesn't by now, then I don't know when it will. But the idea is that is where you get your femaleness, right? So from feminine to feminist to female. And I would say that my journey perhaps because I belong to an enlightened kind of family in one sense. And despite that, certain things happened. But because I was privileged and had education, I did cross the line between feminine and feminism, right? And then again, because I was reflective about it, and in action, when it came to action, I found my voice, as it were, all the silences which are in the depth of my being, always, even now there are silences. I began to articulate all this in as refined a fashion that I could. And that was obviously to find my own aesthetics. So I began to sort of do whatever I did in order to listen to myself first. You're talking about Suno. So first of all, you have to listen to your own self, your own inner voice, right? So in order to listen to your own inner voice, you have to be extraordinarily reflexive and reflective, both, right? Self-reflexivity is extremely important. You've got to learn to be a witnessing self within your own self, and then try to hold the steering in your hand in such a way that you can turn left or right according to your own choice. So that's how you begin to look for your autonomy. And when you are beginning to search for your autonomy, you need to learn to articulate your silences. And in this articulation, to me, I think I use the medium of painting, and I use the medium of, obviously, poetry. And to me, even teaching is a fine art. And teaching is not really teaching, it is communication. Communication and sharing. And I think if a teacher is not a learner, then there's something wrong with the teacher, right? So teaching, learning, this binary also I want you to break always. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my teaching assignments wherever. It could be abroad in a place like Corfu, or it could be in Hong Kong, or it could be in Vietnam, where I was there for a little while, or it could be in a place like Aurangabad, small place in Maharashtra, or Delhi, where you have both. Delhi is, I think, a city. It's very urban, but with 250 villages inside, right? So the diversity that you have here and the desire to translate silence into words, find words for silence, not only for yourself, but to try to empower others who are in a lesser state, to basically, and learn from that, because when the other is empowered, then it comes back rollicking to you as something from which you learn as to how there is diversity of voices all around, and this diversity needs to be celebrated, particularly in the context of women, and not to be seen as a homogenized thing. I mean, I could go on forever, but I think I could stop here and give the mic, as we call it, to Savita.
Great. What a lovely beginning of this evening's conversation that we're going to have. I must say that I do have some memory of how it all began. For me, to be a feminist writer, poet, and so on and so forth. I should tell you that it began with a natural disdain for things that were going on already around me. In my family, in my school, and in my neighborhood. I barely liked anyone intensely. I found people just as actors playing their part. It was very clear to me. And women in particular, all of them led double lives. And it was very obvious to me, including my own mother, whom I saw very little because my parents lived abroad. And for our proper education, we were put in some of three brothers and sisters were left in India. to be sent to public schools where we had to be educated in a proper manner and so on and so forth. But what I really found myself admiring as a child is the life not of human beings, but of animals, of plants, of birds. I was very alive to whatever was going on. It was never a matter of mundane, part of mundane life. For me, I learned more from nature, and nature was always an extraordinary parent to me. I related to it like a child. I formed great relationship of affection with pets that were there in the house, including because I come from Bihar, where a part of my family lives in village. One of my uncles and one of my grandfathers lived there, and I often prayed that I don't have to stay in the city, Ara, where half of the family lived. That as soon as I go to Ara, next day I should move to my village, because the life was so much more authentic. People were not plotting against each other over there, even against, nature, for example. So I spent a lot of time by myself in my grandfather's library, which was not in the city, but in the village house, right? And then there was this extraordinary garden, orchard, within, it was a huge thing where all kinds of fruits were there, trees, and numerous birds and so on. And this house, where I used to find peace. There was no one to disturb me. Servants were the best people that lived in my house. So-called family members were not the best of people, because they were always conspiring. They were always doing something or the other so they could score over the other person. So the subtle family politics never interested me. In fact, I wanted to be away. So I quickly formed an alternative world in which I began to live rather happily, I should say. And I have not forgotten that even today. If you come to my house in Delhi, you'll find that my balcony basically is dedicated to all kinds of plants, where so many kinds of birds come that it is not amazing. And I find time to look at them. There are squirrels which come, crows that come, pigeons, of course, are worst birds because they, break the plants, because they just sit there on top of it. So I look at them with great humor and affection. So what I'm saying is that I was never really defined by patriarchy. I escaped it in a way that required a silent allegiance to a world that is already pulsating around us. So today, I have no qualms in calling myself ecofeminist. Even in my poetry, you'll find great love for nature. And I have been able to redefine some of the most complicated, complex concepts like night, like afternoon, evening, mornings. They're all redefined, they're re-feminized by me in my poetry. Because living in language, coming to Sukrita's point, living in language is also not an easy thing. Because language is the site where all kinds of pain, all kinds of distortion takes place. All kinds of pain is inflicted upon female body. When you seriously begin to look at the language within which you live and write, you find that the words have already acquired meaning which you do not want to have. You're constantly wanting to redefine it, and you fear that your peers, people who are in language, who are also writing, they may not agree with tampering with the words and their meanings. So as a feminist, as a writer, I have paid attention to two things very, very closely and intently. One is nature that is around me, which is not simple nature that we know of. If I have time, I'll tell you how nature is extensive and how much you are part of it as a woman. And second thing is language. If as a feminist you do not understand the language in which you live and the relationship that you have formed with language, you will not be able to create an alternative text. If you're unconscious of the trap that has been laid out for you already as a writer by conspiratorially have established control over all the meanings in terms of signs, significations. If you're not aware of that, then you will not write anything extraordinary. It will not make sense to you even later as you mature. So writing as a man is not an option for me. Writing as a woman is my choice. And that is an extraordinarily difficult thing. And I must say that I have been able to do some work of that. I mean, from the first volume of my poetry, which is Apne Jaisa Jeevan, in which I already defined that life is not life generally. For me, life is what I understand as my own life. My own life and the experiences that I have are not to be falsified by others. And it is not even open for anybody to interfere it with such an extent that they decide the worth of my poetry or whatever. If they don't understand, I have no problem. There will be someone who will come at some point of time to understand. And second thing is that as a feminist, you have to be a little withdrawn from the power structure. When you're writing, you're not writing for winning accolades and awards and this and that. You're writing to define yourself and your time within which you are writing. If I can just bring in Hélène Cixous here, my very favorite French psychoanalytical feminist, who actually said that, look, writing is the way for a woman to also get out of this symbolic structure or symbolic order. You can't just be fighting on the streets. You can't just be part of a movement. You have to be, if you want to sort of overthrow capitalism, which is the cover for patriarchy at the moment. If you do that also, but also some personal work you have to do. Personal work of writing, because that is what opens an extensive field of your bodily wealth. You are so morphed and distorted by the patriarchal language and system of science that you do not even recognize your own beauty. You do not know your own wealth, because 1 million times you have been told that you're lacking in something like this. Yahan tak aa jayenge. You don't have good eyes. You don't have sharp nose. Your color is not you're not fair enough. What is this? And this goes on continuously, and it just drills your brain, and it makes you ultimately lesser than what you are, and then they leave you to be comfortable with yourself, which is a condition which never arrives for women, because you're not comfortable. You're always told that you're short of something or the other. So it is in this tense situation for our being as women, writing is the way for us to resituate ourselves within the same symbolic order. And then by there's a poem in which I say that लिखते रहने से लिख ली जाती है दुनिया, लिखते रहने से मिट भी जाती है दुनिया. You see, by writing you create a world, and by writing you even destroy that world. So it is possible, both possibilities are there in language for us, and that we understand our most intimate relationship with language within which we work, the one we speak and one we transform. So this is where I am as a poet, as a writer, as a theorist, whatever.
So beautifully conveyed, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. So we have with us Apurv. Apurv Narayan, and I'll just give a brief introduction. Apurv, please let me go ahead because this is very special that we have you with us as well. So Apurv Narayan is an author and a translator. He is the son of Sri Kuvar Narayanji, Padma Bhushan, one of India's foremost poets, thinkers, and literary figures of modern times. And of course, there is so much to say, really, which is why I won't essentially go ahead. I'll just tell you all a little bit about Apurv. So, our association goes back many years. And I'm so glad you're a part of this, Apurv, because this is a labor of love, essentially, Viraam. And Apurv Narayan's books include a collection of poetry translations, No Other World, and a co translated collection of short stories, The Play of Dolls. Of course, educated in India and at the University of Cambridge, Apurv writes in English and has professional interests in ecology, public health, and ethics. So happy to have you amidst us. So please join in the conversation, Apurv, whenever you feel like.
Thank you.
Hi, Apurv. Hi, Apurv.
Hi, Savita. Hi, Sukrita.
Hi.
I just want to add a couple of lines. I'm not going to be speaking in this session as such. Just going to be attending it. I was Priya and her parents have been family friends for a good 15 years now, and they live just across our flat in Chitranjan Park. So we share the park, and when talking about nature, I was thinking of that park where my father used to go and sit and write his nature poems in the last 10, 15 years, and a lot of that comes from nature in his work as well. So when Priya started this and she asked me, I want people from the literary strategy to speak on this, the first two names that came to my mind were Sukrita and Savita. I couldn't think of anybody better than
Thank you.
to sort of straddle both the spaces of literature and feminist studies and gender violence. So
Thank you.
there we are, and such a delight to listen to both of you.
Lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Sukrita. Thank you, Savita. So I'll just listen in, and if I feel like chipping in at the end, I'll say something.
Sure.
But I'm just
Love that.
Thanks so much.
Now, this brings me to my second question, essentially, and this is about pain that you were talking about. So, pain is something that's cross-culturally ubiquitous. It's a unifying element amongst all of us. But when we talk about the feminine experience of embodied pain, it seeks an expression. It seeks an articulation, essentially. And cultural theorists often assert that the more intense the pain, the less communicable it is in linguistic terms. So, my question is whether you feel art as a form of language, art as a language, poetry as a language for that matter, can come as a rescuer, an aid to communicate pain, let's say in the absence of words. Do you feel art can be an effective tool for communicating the unsaid and thereby a tool of empowerment, if I may? Because sometimes language has its own limitations.
Actually, if you ask me, why do I write? It's not essentially just my personal pain that I might want to, I don't know if one can say personal or impersonal pain as such, but certainly the partaking of the pain of the other, which is making it as one's own pain, is part of the journey of an artist, right? Of a poet. If you are not going to feel that pain of the other, then I think you should go and write a diary somewhere and quietly indulge in your, what they call dukh or whatever, and clap about it that you have, shared it with your friend or a diary or whatever. But the moment you think in terms of writing a poem or singing or, translating that pain into some kind of expression, I think the word itself becomes a gesture. And it finds its language, it finds whatever strategies that are used, and it's not in the wrong sense that I'm using the word strategy, but the strategies that come up are absolutely, that's where your creativity kind of stands challenging you, can you deal with it? How do you deal with that? It's a struggle. it's like, it's not like you're not writing poetry at a gunpoint. It's not that. But there is a certain kind of a compulsion from within. And this is in spite of yourself that it happens. Despite yourself, you're writing, right? Your conscious self may tell you not to undertake that pain, that struggle, that conflict, that struggle basically to or agonization that goes on, the agony of finding the right word, or the silence between two words or two lines, And this silence is the silence that actually creates a ding, of terror for the person who is reading and for the person who is writing. Not terror really, but of partaking that pain. And yet at the end of that partaking of the pain, what do you end up saying? Beautiful. You don't sit and you cry. You may be crying, but it's like when you watch a film, which is excellent, it's beautiful, you say, even if it's a very, very sad story, But the sad story has been articulated in such a way that you're totally kind of submerged in it. And you come out feeling so good. And then you use words like theoreticians might say catharsis or whatever, purgation or whatever. But it becomes a thing of beauty, That's what is aesthetics, isn't it? And this partaking is ultimately the sharing that happens with your own self first. It happens with your own self first. And so it could be, for instance, I was looking at one of these poems, and if you don't mind, can I read this? It's a poem that I wrote long ago, and I don't know why I wrote it. And I was telling myself, man, what happened to me? Why was I writing this? It's a small poem, and I'll read this. And then I remembered, and I'll go to it later, but let me just read it first. The fetus in the sobbing womb of the girl child. Let me read it again. The fetus in the sobbing womb of the girl child is an offspring of terror of skies, of thunder, lightning, hailstorms falling all over her, of the knife rubbing just a little deeper onto her throbbing throat, her face a rock, eyes turned into stones. A mother without a heart. She wants to give birth, to defy death and put the society in the docks. And I was asking myself, and what happened? Why did I write this? I mean, the fetus in the sobbing womb of the girl child. And then I remembered, what triggered this off? This was when I was working in a homeless shelter, a shelter for the homeless. And there was this girl who I discovered was, she discovered herself that she was pregnant because she had been raped, right? And now what was she going through? And the lines of, it was a conflict. Somewhere there was a rise of motherhood. And on the other hand, there was this terror that was dominating in her mind of what had preceded that pregnancy, right? Now, that kind of a conflict, to have been caught in that pain, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the taste of pregnancy in the context of motherhood, emerging motherhood. She was giving birth to motherhood in herself, right? Now, I was just telling myself, how come I got caught like that? And then I discovered the roots. But what I'm trying to say is that the identification with this kind of a pain, it cannot be dismissed as just empathy, right? It cannot. I had to own it myself to be able to write this. The personal experience of the other, that other has become a subjectivity for me, right? So, similarly, when you are also a creative reader, now this is only as a poet that one is talking about it, but when you are a creative reader, you become a poet yourself because you are reconstructing that particular experience which is in the poem. And for that, you see how, for instance, new language of the woman. By the woman, for the woman, normally by the woman gets created. It's a new language that comes up. Words that had not been erstwhile ever used. So that is why that takes me back to the, say, Ismat Chugtai, for instance. Ismat Chugtai had to dig out the language of what they ultimately started saying, Begumati Zuban. Begumo ki zuban jo hai, from where did she get that? She used to hide under the bed, behind the doors, and listen to the gossip and chatter of women sitting in the courtyard. And from this gossip, scandal, chatter, she would go beyond it and replicate that language as language of creativity, and made space for that language, validated that language for literature in Urdu. Urdu, it's a very sophisticated language, and Persian poetics was kind of dictating how to write. There was no place for this except for a language in Urdu which was called Rekhti, right? And this Rekhti language was dismissed by men critics because they said, oh, that Urdu is for Rekhti, which is the other name for Urdu, which is used for the female voice. And there the tabooed kind of subjects were taken up to be written in Rekhti in the 18th century when Rangin wrote in Rekhti, But nobody took Rekhti seriously because it was a woman's language. Even if men wanted to write something on behalf of that, it was considered to be kind of infra-dig. And that's why in Umrao Janada you have somebody saying, I think Umran Jan says in the book, she says, as a character, somebody says, oh, do you write in Rekhti? She said, I don't. My language is Urdu, right? Not Rekhti. Because it was infra-dig to write in. But she was writing, whatever she was saying, it was a woman's language that she was using. But what I'm trying to say is that women's language has always been considered to be not good, vulgar, full of expletives or exaggeration and so on. Why would there be exaggeration? There would be this whole, or rather flowery, rather than exaggeration. It would be very decorative. So even today, if you were to listen to your grandmother's conversation, two grandmothers talking to each other, they would be using what they call muhavra, proverbial language. The idiom would be very beautiful, very creative, not homogenized like all of us speak, in the same kind of Hindi, same kind of English, So they were very creative. Sometimes the strategy was to conceal, And that is why, because they didn't want everybody to understand what they were saying. So it was a womanly language, right? Because it was tabooed to say certain things. That's why one more point I want to make is, look at the 16th. If we talk about progressive in the modern contemporary context, look at Navnita Devsen's essay, or rather when she brings forth this Chandrabati Ramayana. What is Chandrabati Ramayana? It's actually a Sitayan. It is the story of Sita growing up into puberty, into adulthood, menstruation, everything is actually sung and codified in some language and put it forth. And Navnita Devsen writes on how Chandrabati in the 16th century was writing this kind of, or rather singing it to, it was a women's congregation that she would have, but women writing or singing for women, and then being very free to say whatever they did, which in the 20th century came up with Sylvia Plath and her confessional poetry, right? Something like that. So lots of things happened in literature. You say, why literature for feminism? That's why. See, because literature, poetry is giving you new language to speak in, finding the right words. And if the right words are not there, then strategies, linguistic strategies are worked out so that silences become, more, they are articulated through silences. There would be a lot of words, but to make you silently understand what they really mean. It's an experiential journey. A poem gives you it presents before you the kind of on a platter. Here, taste this. And then you say, oh, how true. Don't you always come out with this? How true. There is a sense of familiarity, and it's all new. It's all new. That's the beauty. It's not a contradiction. That's what literature is all about. And that's why all mythology, feminists have been reinterpreting mythology, because that's also a strategy. Mashoda Devi goes and writes a story on Draupadi. And in this, Draupadi disrobes herself totally. There's no Krishna to come and say, here is your sari, wear it. And it will go on stretching as longer cloth. No, it's nakedness that is used as a weapon. It's a very feminist gesture. And so gestures, words, idioms, they get reconstructed, deconstructed, and then recodified. And that's a kind of beautiful leela or playfulness in literature that happens, And in fact, the fiction that you read many a time is more true than reality as you see it, because it's all hypocrisy all around, mostly pretension and hypocrisy that you see.
How beautiful, Savita. Would you like to add to that, please? I'm sorry, you're on mute. Yes.
I'm saying that Sukrita has opened up the sky. It is too expansive. But let me focus on the original question that you had asked about the experience of pain and whether literature helps us to address that. So there are 2 points over here. As a writer, of course, I'll say, and there are a lot of theories about it also. The first one is that pain is in the existence itself. Human life is defined by it, and you experience it at various levels, at different levels. Second thing is because within this whole language, which is a symbolic order where the signs are already not in your favor. The signs are already in position to define you. That is to say, you're not left any space to define yourself. That is the major source of pain for women who are writing. So basically, the pain is in the body and the pain is in the language. And that is the suffocating experience that muffles you, that allows you to seek that silence that Sukrita has been talking about. Because indeed there is a silence. There is something pre-language. There is something pre-verbalized. Right? And so feminists have gone there. I'll just take name of another French feminist, Julia Kristeva. And I'm saying it because I do believe that is how I approach my own existential obliqueness within this symbolic order. So pain is of a very different order. It is muted, but it is forever present. It is forever flowing through your body, through your mind, and in the language in which you express yourself. So the strategies to either you want to address the pain that you're experiencing, or it is to get away from it, get rid of it. Getting rid of it is very difficult. Expressing it is still possible. So in art, in literature, in philosophy also, you do find that it has been theorized. It has been articulated in one way or the other. Right? In India, for example, I still read part of Buddhist literature precisely because I need it. I need it so much to understand what pain actually is. And in Buddhist literature, pain is the essence of human life being, dukh. And he has an answer, Buddha has an answer, that you can get over pain or get away from it only through compassion. And assessing and judging your desires. If your desires are not judicious, if they cross the boundary of plenitude, for example, then nothing can lessen your pain. So it is also a responsibility of writers and painters, poets, to understand how much do you want from what you're doing. There are a lot of poets and painters and artists who are in deep pain. And no matter how much they write, it never leaves them. I mean, some stories are known, Van Gogh, for example. I mean, how tragic was his life? How brilliant was he as a poet? Look at the contradiction. If somebody asked him, did your painting soothe you? He would certainly say no. He would say, it drives me mad. My own paintings drive me mad. Some great writers will tell you that it is better to commit suicide than to go on living. People simply say that, these people are very sensitive, that is why they commit suicide. It is utter rubbish. It's not sensitivity. It's inability to transcend your condition, your human condition within which you are performing your artistic functions. So I would say that pain is addressed by expression, no doubt, and for feminist writing is inviting yourself to a field of happiness temporarily. There's a lot of wealth lying inside you and outside the language in which you are struggling to express yourself and address your fears and your pain. So, wonderful way of theorizing it has been by Gustav Kosteva is that there are two stages within which human life finds a definition, a self-definition. One is pre-linguistic, which she calls semiotic. It's like clues that I'm giving you all since you are asking, and I also agree with her quite a bit. All right, where the sounds have not become words, where meanings are not defined or determined, they are in the form of traces. And this is the realm of what she calls kora. Kora is a Greek word which has been used by Plato in his play Timaeus, where this nebulous realm of interrelationships and intertextuality is given there, where there is no desire on the part of a person living in the field of this semiotic inarticulation. There's no hurry to define it, to come out of it. It's a blissful state. It's like you being in a womb, a child being in the womb. So how would anyone know? The child never articulates what he or she felt when she was in the womb of a mother. But when she comes out or he comes out of it, forever in her or his life, they look for the same felicity, freedom to swim, and warmth. That is never to be found ever again. So, Kristeva says that it is a realm where a certain kind of motherhood not in the sense the patriarchy defines, but in the sense of bearing something which you will give birth to, right? I mean, the trees can be mother, if they give rise to another plant and so on and so forth. It is in that sense, in that primordial sense that she talks about. And the other realm is, of course, when you enter the semiotic order and your status in this symbolic order can never be one of muted subject, a silent subject. Silence is not something that is really appreciated here. What is appreciated is articulation, more and more articulation, refinement of interpretation. That is what is known as literature or any form of art. So this madness to refine an oppressive system more and more is something that really challenges writing, and women's writing in particular. That is why Luce Irigaray was another French feminist. I'm just bringing them because they have done the most brilliant work in this area. He says we have to create not a semiotic order, but we have to create another symbolic order. Because after all, we have learned all kinds of corruption. How meaning is corrupted, how concepts are born, all of this, because they're all, as you would know from Foucault and all of these things, they're all they are generated or they're born out of discourses, basically. And discourses themselves are sort of interlaced, part of the same conspiracy of power. Truth is born out of a discourse. The status of truth beyond discourse is a state of being undefined and being powerless. So, when one is thinking of pain, it is this complicated. The pain is experienced while you think that you are redefining something. Pain is experienced when you are born into it. Of course, there are alternative ways of looking at it. For example, there would be others, like, in critical theories of various sorts. I've worked with someone called Roy Bhaskar, who's a very important philosopher of critical realism. He keeps on saying that at the bottom of everything is love, pure love and bliss. And it is that we have to find, right? So maybe Kristeva is saying almost similar thing, but she's not defining it as bliss or love or freedom. It's something else. Freedom, truth, liberties, these are produced by liberal discourse from 17th century onwards. And in the way they have been articulated, they're unattainable because it is not possible within this system for working class to become free, for women to become equal. Impossible. The order is created in such a way. So when, as women, we are writing, the only way we can mitigate our pain is by writing it as clearly as we can, by not hiding the pain, by not being super optimistic. Okay, and that is the way we deal with inner pain. Outer pain, if somebody has hit us, we can hit them back, if possible. But what is going on inside, continuous mourning of existence, then we don't have many tools. Writing is one way, painting is another, and it is better, like Sukrita writes and paints, and she can still live more beautifully than very many people who can neither write nor paint. All right. For me, I never wait, I never hope to experience bliss. That keeps me happier. It's not a situation of hopelessness, it is just being realistic. In worldly terms, in personal terms, I've seen situations which are really painful. I was only 15 when my mother passed away. I looked after my 4 brothers who were very young. So you can say at the age of 15, I became a mother of my siblings, right? When I was barely in the middle of my 50, my husband passed away. My 2 daughters were still very young, and I had to sort of, educate them, and now they're placed properly in various good universities and so on and so forth. So I count them also as pain, right? And it helps me in writing. But I would still not hope that I can get out of it by writing. I'd be happy if I could articulate it in such a way that others can see that this is one of the ways of dealing with pain. Even French feminists are more optimistic than I am. Right? But what gives me happiness, I'll tell you what, is when I write poetry and I redefine it is possible to create an alternative symbolic order, which is more empathetic, which is more caring about the other, which is more open towards the world in which we live, nature, and so on and so forth. Nature is a blissful, if you can relate to nature, it gives you a great happiness. I have experienced bliss, I must say, when I have been in nature. That is to say, when I have gone into a field of lavender flowers. This is one experience that I have brought into my poetry. When I was living in Essex with my husband, I was living in Essex, kind of a county. It's a county, one of the counties. And the place where I lived was called Lendon, which was close to Basildon. And in Lendon, they had created a kind of a forest, and inside the forest, there was a field of lavender flowers. So when I just were taking a stroll and we just got inside, when I saw that field, I can still tell you it was a sheer bliss, happiness, elation. And it is very difficult to make others understand that these things can give you happiness. But we must orient ourselves to nature's beauty. It does not require you to put it in words. It does not require you to relate to nature by writing poetry about it. You can directly relate to nature. There is this one Hindi poet whom I admire quite a bit. Her name is Gagan Gill. She written a travelogue. It's called Awak. This is about looking at the mountains and the experience, and there was no language there. Of course, she brings all these things for us by going into language and writing it, but her own experience of watching Mount Kailash and the range of mountains and just being with mountains and herself. It's extraordinary, that experience that she has written. So I think it is important that feminists like us, we acknowledge that one of the sources for us to be happy is to go into nature. Because she's our part. We are its part. We have been bifurcated through the construction of culture by patriarchy and capitalist patriarchy, because nature was something to be exploited, just as women were to be exploited. And this has created so much pain, this bifurcation. This bifurcation has created so much pain that it is lesser then the exploitation of nature's resources and female's body takes place within this mode of production. So I think writing requires this kind of alert consciousness, because there are always double or triple meaning every time, any experience that you go to understand, that there will be more layers, and there will always be some part of it which will remain unsaid. It will be the remainder. It's part of human existence that we will never be, will never experience completion. Will always be part of a project as human beings. So this could be another way of saying that this incompleteness, the sense of being incomplete, till the very end, when we touch that end, which is called death, things remain to be done, remain to be said. We remain in the realm of the unsaid, as I would put it.
That's very beautiful and very profound. Thank you. Thank you, Savita. We have a few questions from our interns, from our members of Viraam as well. So I think Mona has a question, as well as Vasupriya. Please go ahead. Anshika has a question as well. Anshika, I've received your question. You might want to ask directly. Please go ahead. Shall we have Mona first?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everybody. My video is not working due to some reason all of a sudden. Really sorry about it. So you all talked about like all of it wonderfully, and I was completely engrossed listening to it. It's very difficult to even figure out the question at the end of the talk. But then essentially, if I look back, one of the most important question, which kind of was important, seemed important to me rather, is while talking about reality and accepting the reality in the form of writing, sometimes don't you think that we kind of imagine possibilities, though we try to not remain optimistic, but there is a concrete reality. But when we actually delve into the realm of writing, at some point of time, we try to be visionaries, which essentially can, I'd rather say, can melt down our pain or kind of add more sense to it at times. So, do you think that it is left upon the readers at certain circumstances for them to be read upon, for them to be understood or interpreted, or should it be completely our own thoughts, our own feelings that nobody has the right to justify in their own terms?
Can I take this, Savita? Yeah. So, one has to go back to this whole question of what exactly is literature. It's not as if, oh, good to see you, Mona. So I'm glad you appeared. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the thing is that, we have to understand what literature is trying to do. It's not a question of we trying to be visionary or something. That's why I was stressing on that right from the beginning. See, even for instance, forget about we who are consciously writing and so on, but what about these grandmothers who would sit and, do storytelling? Look at the imaginative construction. I mean, you have a whole rich repository of undocumented, intuitive creations in the way the story is told, which is kind of tailor-made at times to the listener's ear, right? One of the things that the storytelling and story listening, Sunor, and we have been brought up on that, the story. One is trying to get some kind of a sense of order, even if it is like the end result is chaos at times, in a poem or in a story. The end result may be as though very consciously there is a built-in message of how reality is so chaotic, right? But a lot of rational working out goes into that to create the image of irrationality. But what I'm trying to say is that storytelling, there are two things that are happening. And even a poem is in a way a storytelling, right? It's a narrative of sorts. In this, one is a very deep commitment to trying to catch hold of the truth of that moment, right? And that is where your word visionary comes in. Sometimes, if you're you're too conscious of craft of a poem, for instance, or a story, it will only be presented as craft, not as a vision that comes as a flash, It is a perfect balance between craft and vision that you see in the form of a poem. And behind that, the struggle of the writer or the storyteller is to catch hold of that moment which is going to flash as a moment of truth, right? And that is where, whether it is pain, normally pain or agony or whatever is deeply felt emotion, the impact is that it expands the consciousness of your own self as the creator and also the consciousness of the receiver. This is the job of it happens. I mean, it's not as if you have to consciously build it into your poem, but a good poem gives you a very it's an expansion of the self in a way, of consciousness in a way, right? You capture that moment, the truth of the moment, and that is, call it agony, call it bliss. I don't know what word you will use for that. But certainly it creates a sense of some kind of an order in your being, right? Even if it may not last for long, but you get that and you love it. You want to hang on to it. And the next time you go to that particular poem or novel or a story, it will become something else and a different sense of order. Let me tell you that. That's the beauty of literature. Or even the grandmother's tales, That is why I remember as a child in my grandmother's lap, I would say, please tell me that story again, such and such story. Why would I want to listen to the story again? Because I would want to replicate something that I had experienced as, call it bliss or satisfaction or whatever. But in the telling of the tale, the grandmother would take it to another direction altogether. And it will be a new experience, So there is a uniqueness to every, production of the same thing also. Same story, told again, would be different. Now, that's the beauty of life itself. And what is literature doing? In the context of particularly, what are we talking about here? Women in particular, because a lot of the area of women, particularly the pain of the women, particularly what you talk about subliminal kind of pain, it has been kind of relegated to the margins somewhere, or there is an invisibility even today of that pain. And the job of a very sensitive, call it sensitive, or somebody, for lack of a better word, somebody who can really dig into the consciousness of that woman who's not been able to articulate, and you articulate for that person, right? You get to that particular angle, that particular point, fine point, which is missed out by the whole world, and you are able to see it. And you are able to see it because you got certain kind of maybe a flash, and it's very mysterious. Sometimes you can work very hard to get it and you don't get it. Yeah. And sometimes it comes as a flash. That's the beauty of it. Maybe the mountain will tell you the secret, or the tree will tell you, or the cawing of a crow might tell you that, Or sometimes it is just meditation, pure meditation. And suddenly something flows into it. It becomes very mysterious. But there is something to creativity, and women's creativity, I think, we need to understand it even more, because it functions at multiple levels. Sometimes you can see that you have to become androgynous also. And that's my favorite thing, Savita, I have to bring it in. Androgyny, You have to, Krishna Sokti said that. I mean, she said, I have to become Hashmat to be able to write these pieces in 4 volumes. I have to put on the idea of being It was not put on. She said, I feel it like that. My handwriting changes as Hashmat. As Krishna Sopti, I'm writing as perhaps a woman, though she would hate me if I say she was writing as a woman. No, she was androgynous. There was this whole ability to, like Virginia Woolf said, that ability to contain the male and female within oneself, right? And that's what I want to do. I call it ideal of androgyny. Honestly, I do. My feminism would want me, is pushing me to go to being androgynous, And I wish I am going in that direction. I hope I am. And that's not only me saying that, somebody like Vishnu Prabhakar. What is Vishnu Prabhakar doing in his huge novel, 600 pages? He is, in a discursive way, in intuitive ways, he's talking about Ardhanarishwar, making the characters discuss that. So one is for, the other one is against, and it's a whole new discourse that you find in that novel, beautifully. And I truly believe that a poet like Kumar Narayanji had to be androgynous to be able to write the way he did. There was that feminine side of his personality that came out with those delicate nuances, That's why I love his poetry, So beyond a point, you have to shoot down the binaries, realize them, and then shoot them down.
Thank you so much. Especially like when you talk about it, I think the biggest someone who comes to my mind is Rabindranath Tagore, without whom I can't imagine a little bit of whatever we have learned, honestly. And when I talk of Rabindranath Tagore, I think the next that comes to me is about the resistance that has come along with the writings of Ashapurna Devi, Moheshita Devi, or Binapani Devi, and even with the Bengali feminist writers, essentially. And somehow I have, while reading them and while trying to understand or formulate them, I have understood that there's somehow a complete need of them, to formulate the unsaid pain. And while in doing that, in their writings, they are trying to talk about something about the people who are confronting pain. Now, for us, I think we all have our different ways to deal with pain. It might be solitude for someone. It might be resistance for someone. It might be, acceptance for someone. And it might be going beyond the worldly affairs and trying to seek death. So do we is there a tendency, be it within feminist literature or, the critical literary theory, that we are trying to bring all of it as in the umbrella of true resistance without actually going into understanding the other forms of pain, like it may be nostalgia, it may be loss, as ma'am said, or the other forms, and even it may be a connection with nature or something that we feel is completely closer to us, but it's kind of unique to individuals. So that was a question bugging me.
Savita, are you going to answer, or should I take it?
You tell me.
No, I'll just put in 2 sentences here about the, I would like to immediately refer to partition experiences, and the pain of the partition experiences, which were actually silently kept invisible for decades, right? Particularly women's pain is what I'm talking about. The suffering, the violence that was suffered by women. And so therefore, when we start talking about it, writers were talking about it, whether it is Manto or it is, and there were female-centric, short stories and poetry and so on. What about Amrita Pritam talking about Ajaka Varis Shah, invoking Varis Shah and the pain of the women, that you mourned only the death of one woman. Look at the way today, thousands of women, being abducted and raped, and the pain that she shares through her poem. It's a classic poem. Now, this pain obviously was the articulation of the pain, the way the writer does, in a way is resistance. The very articulation is resistance. It's not a question of having to go to the street with slogans and then it becomes resistance. No. it is going against the grain, because you are also questioning this whole notion of honor, for instance. And in that, it's not only women who are doing it. Rajinder Singh Bedi does it in a story called Lajwanti, So we have to remember that. That's what I mean, And of course, when it comes to the personal narratives, we know Rishi's work, we know about Kamla Bhasin, we know how they talk about the other side of silence, right? So they do it in a different way. But in literature, it's been happening right from 1947 through Manto and others, Manto did that. And it was women's pain that he was bringing it out. Cold though. I mean, what a powerful story. It's actually created stones out of men, When the girl who's been raped multiple times, cold though means something quite different. It becomes a metaphor for total rape, universal rape of all women, Automaton. It's an automaton. So, I mean, partition cannot be forgotten because of the literature that also it produced, of course, as a phenomenon, the way it is. But if you look at the history of partition in historical documentation, it is just records of, statistics and official kind of debates of whether partition should have happened or not and who made it happen, etc., etc. But you go to literature and you feel that you're gripped with the horror of it all, So
I'll just read a poem
go ahead.
so that Mona can be answered by me. It is that pain of not something that has not been, which is unsayable. All right. So, for example, Sukrita pointed out Manto's story, Kholdo. Obviously, it is one of those stories where you can experience pain in its highest form, known form, as far as women are concerned, and their bodies being, these bodies are made diseased basically through violence, rape, right? These are all, some other day I'll talk about what happens to women's body and how the pain is sort of instilled in it. Apart from the pain existential pain that I was talking about, you experience as a writer, these are additional things that only sort of add on to our understanding. So the pain is also of articulation. Pain is because there is every possibility that you will be misunderstood. And what can you do about it? If someone misunderstands you by way of right, by way of owner of our language, then what do you do? It is this pain that cannot be addressed so easily. So there's a pain in not being able to say something, and there's a different kind of pain in saying something. Because the risk and the fear is extraordinary. Right? So just read one poem. कहने की वेदना. Everyone can understand Hindi? Otherwise I'll simultaneously translate. But just hear it out. I'm just reading. आसमान था आज सारा राय के व्यावान की आकाश जैसा. You know Sara Rai, a fiction writer in Hindi? She has in one story, she only talks about the sky. It's an extraordinary story. I don't want to divert you. Just giving you the reference. आसमान था आज सारा राय के व्यावान की आकाश जैसा, खद्दर चादर सा बादलों के सफेद डोरे से बुना गया, और यह जीवन एक संशय भर, भाषा भी संशयग्रस्त. एक धमाका जो हुआ था भीतर, मैं गई लगातार सोचती हुई कि जो कुछ कहने जा रही हूं, पाने जो कुछ, वह कितना निर्भर है कहे जाने की शैली पर. कैसे कहूंगी वो बात जो सुने जाने पर ही आश्रित है. जरा भी गलत चली जुबान, आवाज हुई ढीली कि बिगड़ जाएगी बात. कहना भी कैसे जीवन सा उसे जीने की कला जैसा ही है, और सुने जाने पर तो कहेगा कोई वश नहीं। वहां पर क्रूर स्वायत्तता है सुनने वाले की। यह सच है, कई बातें सीधी सुन ली जाती हैं, कितनी लाचार अपने सीधेपन में होती हैं, मगर कई वर्षों इंतजार करती हैं सही सही सुने जाने की फिक्र में किसी तरह बची हुई। कितनी लाचार अपने अर्थों की गिरह को खोलती बांधती, स्पृहा से भरी सुनने वाले की स्वायत्तता के प्रति। ऐसे ही था मन आज खद्दर आसमान। फिलवक्त यही बात थी जो मन को यूं खुरदुरा बनाए हुए थी, एक सादगी जैसे अपने ही भीतर चुभती हुई। So our innocence of being the speaker, of being the articulator, becomes like something that tortures you. Your own innocence tortures you, because you are never in control of what it is going to be thought of, how it is going to be understood. And being misunderstood is the basis of being misrecognized. And misrecognition can simply wreck your mind and your body. So, truly, the one who constructs you as a woman has already committed the act of misrecognizing you. You are never a self, you are always an other in this symbolic order. And that is something that has to be addressed when you are writing deep feminist literature. Writing is also not so liberating as I was saying. I was very ambiguous. It's also a very big risk. Because after all, towards the very end of your life, you might look at your own work and say, what have I written, and how I have been understood? Life has come to an end. Have I done anything that soothes anybody else, even a little bit? So literature is a great responsibility, full of extraordinary gambles, risks. You simply might feel towards the end of it all completely empty. It means nothing, frankly speaking. So this you cannot dismiss. The possibility of being misrecognized, possibility of being useless, for example. All these risks are there as part of a writing self. And this pain is something that you cannot expect any state or any empire to solve it or mitigate it for you. It's your responsibility. How will you behave as a person who understands all this politics of being pushed around, of being defined, of being made into a shadow? Your body in front of your eyes has been turned into a shadow. Its materiality has been ripped apart. That is why when it is violated, there is no remorse in the soul of those who violate you. So men writing and women writing, I think men's condition is little better than women's. I wouldn't say that, because men who are writers are also very sensitive. They know, they have a lot of knowledge. What I'm saying, they will agree with it, in fact, because they experience that. As writers, there is a possibility, as Sukrita is saying, of attaining a status of androgyny, because that writing is not even possible, frankly speaking. Androgynous self is a real writer's self. But for both these gendered positions within our language system, women have more chances of being left to feel empty and useless, and writing coming to nothing, basically. It is possible, quite a bit. That makes me sad quite a bit, I tell you. When I'm writing, I do have this question in my mind. What am I writing? What kind of literature I'm creating? Should I have been doing something else? And I love resistance. I love to resist. I have accepted all forms of resistance. I've been on the streets, shouting slogans, being with my sisters, in this chilchilati dhoop of Delhi. I have marched along with a lot of women, falling sick after that because 48-degree temperature. But something extraordinary comes up and you have to go out. So I love to resist, all right? But there are various forms which also can be forms of resistance, but they are not, they cannot assure you as much. And who is there to give us assurance? There is no God. There is no deity who can assure you of success of your work. That's illusion that one should not entertain. Your pen, your ink, and your paper, and you. That is the universe of a writer and a female writer at most. When I'm writing, I am most lonely. I have no assurance of being appreciated, being meaningful, being recognized. I have no assurance from anywhere. And men, they keep on playing politics with women's writing. That they never stop. And I must tell you, I don't feel bad about it. I simply get affirmed that that is how they are, that is how they live. And I don't want to impress them at all. I just want to impress myself and some of my friends. I write for my friends, and I know I'm talking to you all very truthfully, believe me. I'm extremely happy that I'm talking to you all about these things. It's an honest statement. Honesty.
3 cheers. I just wanted to know how much time I need to go, actually.
Yes. I think we're running short of time, in fact. It's been a wonderful panel.
Yeah, lovely. Savita, thank you for your comments. I think your bold statements, lovely.
Would really love to have you again, ma'am, honestly, because we're all ears and we want to keep listening. But since we're running short of time, we'll have to end the session now. I'm sorry, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes,
thank you very much. We should be also thanking you for making this program possible. And I've been able to say a few things that I've been wanting. I mean, generally, I write in more sort of hidden ways through poetics and all that. But today,
there are so many takeaways, honestly. I can't even sum it up. It won't do justice to the entire session. We are striving towards creating this safe space. We're creating content. We're trying to engage in a kind of a discursive protest. And today's session was very important to kind of bring back ourselves to the realization that discourses are very much embedded in power structures. So thank you. We'll keep the conversation on. And I'll be writing to the two of you, ma'am, because we have quite a few questions as well that are pouring in. But
that's expected, I think.
So thank you. Thank you for being a part of.
I must thank you, Priya and Apur, who actually got us together. And it was wonderful to talk to you all. And of course, Sukrita is my friend. So we often, these things that I'm talking to you all, we often chat while we are walking, in the garden, Lodi garden or somewhere. We're often talking about such things. So to articulate it in this formal manner, of course, while others are also part.
It's really triggered a lot of thoughts for me personally, and I'm going to talk to both of you and all of you later on about it.
Thank you very much. I think it's been really wonderful. Thank you, Apur. Thank you, Priyadashini and all the others. And thank you, of course, Savita, for, I think the dialogue was more than a dialogue. It was something like opening up more avenues of thought. And, I think it was very inspirational.
I must say, Priya, that we have, myself and Sukrita, we are planning to have a series of such dialogues. And then we want to bring it out as a book. So this kind of thing, we can repeat it with you again, and we'll do it somewhere else also. And ultimately, a kind of a text will be created of creative dialogues, as it can be said, and number of things, more things we will discuss than what we did today. Even very, very ordinary issues that irk us and make us, sort of sad. We discuss that also as part of the literature process of writing and creatively thinking.
Thank you.
Today. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night.